All right, we are live. So thank you very much for joining me today, Mike. What I would like to start off the podcast with is a question more so for coaches, because I think as coaches, they're typically the people who are trying to instill behavior change in their clients, but it's something that they can often quite struggle with. So I guess from your perspective and from talking to many different coaches in the industry, what do you think coaches are maybe getting wrong when it does come to understanding how to kind of get their clients to change?
Firstly, I don't think a lot of coaches are getting it wrong. I think a lot of coaches are doing really well. I certainly have had, I've had great success with coaches myself, and I think there are some amazing coaches around who are really good at helping people change their behavior, who have like a kind of natural knack for it, but who have also had lots of experience in coaching people that have led them to kind of understand a lot about people and what helps them change. Um, I guess rather than maybe me sort of saying what I guess individual coaches are getting wrong, I wonder if maybe I can comment a little bit on what I think the industry gets wrong when it comes to what it expects from coaches. And I think, from my kind of position on the periphery of the fitness industry, what I see a lot of is a lot of kind of business mentorship, a lot of marketing, a lot of really, really heavy focus on how to run a business, which is really important. You can't be a self-employed coach without knowing how to run a business or knowing how to market your business. But sometimes I wonder if in all of that messaging, actually how to be a really good coach gets a bit lost in translation. And I think sometimes people focus a bit too much on the marketing. And I think that can be what people get wrong.
Hmm. Yeah, I think obviously with, as you're mentioning, there, like mentorships, and a big thing with them is like sales calls and like closing the sale, and even up to the point of getting somebody's payment details on the actual call itself. And I think that, like, well, obviously it does come across as sleazy. Sometimes that just puts the focus on just getting the person in the door versus being like, I actually want to help this person change, and can come at it from a almost like forcing a person into the actual position versus giving them the actual time to actually think if they're ready. Or even if that can, as a coach, that can have you come into the call with the mindset of, I just want to get this person in the door so that I can earn more money, versus have this person's best interest in mind, and maybe kind of ask them some uncomfortable questions during the call, because I think that's maybe
Pain
something that,
point.
yeah, painful. Get to people's like real kind of true desires for actually changing, because I think that's really important beyond the, I want to look good and like with my top off or like that. Actually
Yeah.
asking like why that is the case, because sometimes for some people that could be like a true underlying reason why they want to get in shape, but for other people it might be the case that that's just a really superficial reason.
Yeah.
They really don't understand what's behind it, and then as a
But I
result,
guess also it kind of speaks to why the person wants to be a coach as well. Is that again, does somebody want to be a coach because they think it's a lucrative career in which they can make lots of money and live like the laptop lifestyle or whatever, or do they want to be a coach because they're passionate about coaching? And I think that can be quite confronting to a lot of people. Like I think that you know you sort of see a lot of people kind of going straight into online coaching, and sometimes I get that that's kind of a great career pathway for people, and it allows people to do what they want and to live a great life and all of that sort of stuff. But I guess my I've always found really great benefits from in-person personal training, from having a real life coach, and and I kind of feel like the experience that you get from coaching people face to face is so valuable. And I think that maybe sometimes some people, I think some people you can have people who have those skills who have gone straight into online coaching, but I think sometimes the in-person coaching part of it is how they develop those skills. So I think it kind of depends what they're looking at. There's so many parallels between like business coaching and actual coaching as well, like in terms of how why people get into it, why people want it. Do people want it just for the superficial stuff, or do they want it for the deep things, the rewarding nature of it, and what other things it can bring to them. So there's lots to think about.
mm, I, I guess like a question for you here is, like, you've mentioned that working with in-person coach has been like very valuable for you. So I'm curious as to, like, what have you found a benefit from work with in-person coaches versus like you're maybe even thinking about going on to an online coach, and how they've maybe helped you change with your own goals?
I think firstly, like the amount of data that you have access to if you're coaching somebody in person as opposed to online is incomparable, really. Like, you know, from sort of, even actually, like at the moment I don't have one-on-one personal training, it's group coaching, but the amount of feedback that my coach gets about me, he sees my range of movement when I do my
Hmm.
exercises face to face in person, not just on a video from an angle that I've chosen that might not be optimal or whatever. um he knows, he can see how hard I'm pushing myself in my sets. He can see if actually that should have been a top set or not. And I sort of do a hybrid of both. So with my coach, I have the in-person personal train, the in-person kind of group coaching, but he's also my online coach as well. So I I have other programs that I do on my own at other parts of the week. And again, this is something that's very personal to me, but one of the things that I find most challenging about training is intensity and going to failure and making sure that my, every rep is intentional and that I'm doing my sets properly and all of that sort of stuff. um and it's very easy to kind of fake it to yourself and to your coach if they're not there. Oh yeah, I tried really hard in that set today, I've got this weight, but he doesn't know if you're doing it slowly and controlled, or if you're just kind of bouncing the weights on a leg extension or whatever. It's it is it is like a you kind of have to have a lot more of your own input if you're using an online coach, I think. And I think there's different ways of doing it. Like, of course, people have much more deep and in-depth check-ins, depending on what the service is. And so, for example, I'm sure that lots of coaches do look at, things like form videos and stuff like that, but you're not going to sit and watch. You're not going to watch someone's entire gym session, are you? So it is, the amount of information that the coach gets, and the amount of that information that is actually accurate, I think, is a bit more if it's in person.
Mm. Yeah, there's definitely like a delay with like online coaching in regards to, obviously, your like the feedback is not real time.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
even if somebody is sending you videos during the session, like it's unlikely that you're going to be sitting on
Yeah,
your laptop like responding
yeah,
like in the exact same time. So there is there's definitely a lot more, how to say, you definitely want to have like a certain level of like confidence in your ability to work with an online coach, I think. From certainly from a training perspective, because like I'll have some clients who are fantastic for sending me videos all the time, almost to the point I'm like, oh my god, this person sent me like 20 clips of one session. I'm like, okay, let's calm down. And I'll have some people who will never ever send me a training clip, no matter how many times I ask them. But I think like kind of speak on something that we're going to speak about later. Over time, I do find that like those people that like the more like the less I badger them for training videos, like they eventually kind of come to the realization like, okay, training's going training from their side of things has been going well, but now they're coming to the conclusion that, okay, I seem to be hitting a little bit of a kind of brick wall. Maybe I will kind of like actually decide to send you over video, because for a lot of people it can be uncomfortable to record themselves in the gym. I'm used to it because I've been doing it for so long, so I don't think twice about taking out my tripod, and maybe
yeah,
as well I just have a little bit of confidence in my ability and like whatever I'm doing in the gym. Whereas a person who is just right in the door, they may think they're like lifting too light to have a tripod in the gym, or lifting incorrectly, or like even be thinking about like, what's that person thinking about me as I'm recording my video? Did they think that I'm full of myself, or I'm trying to be like a famous influencer or something like that? And there's a lot of different things that are kind of going on here, and so much that can just be solved with actually work with a personal trainer. Like I started off as a personal trainer for 3-4 years before COVID hit, and definitely helped me massively in regards to like online coaching now. But it's something I do push a lot of people who inquire, who are early in the door, to do, because they're gonna get so much more out of it. Like you were mentioning there in regards to like intensity and like just getting better at training. It sounds like, right? And so much of that is just delayed when you're working with an online coach for all the reasons I just spoke
yeah,
about. Because like they're skills at the end of the day, and it's very difficult to actually kind of get yourself to the point of pushing really hard.
yeah. No, I completely agree, especially if it's something that doesn't come naturally to you. Like I was never somebody that was into kind of sports or the gym like at school when I was young. So it's kind of a weird concept to come into as an adult, that you're meant to be like suffering intentionally in this kind of situation when stuff is really hard and really heavy to lift. So you have to do more of it until you're, and to stop like when you're not able to continue. I think most people will most people who are like me will automatically stop a few reps short of failure, by going on their kind of instinct and their intuition in terms of when they feel that they should stop. And so I think it's a skill to learn, and it's hard to learn that without having that safety aspect of having somebody in the room that knows what they're doing to go, hang on a minute, that's too heavy for you, or you're more likely to go, to err on the side of caution, I guess. Well, I don't think that's true actually. I'm sure that lots of people are, potentially likely to lift weights that are too heavy for them. But I guess that's the point, is that we're also different in how we do it. So how can a trainer advise you effectively if they haven't seen how what your mindset is when you train in the gym? Like, are you underestimating what you should be doing or overestimating what you should be doing?
Yeah, you rarely find the people who are like smack bang in the middle and doing the right thing at the right time straight away. It's always
So where they
either
wouldn't need a coach, right? Like, that's
yes,
part of the reason that you need a coach to kind of help guide you in what you should be doing.
yeah, for sure. And I guess like to touch on, I guess the client side of things, right, or the person in the gym side of things. What do you think for that person who's maybe either underlifting or overlifting? Like, what would you think would be something that would motivate them to get closer to not necessarily sign up a coach, but trying to find out like a better way of essentially doing things? Like, would it be a case of maybe kind of get to the point of, okay, I've been doing this thing for long enough, not quite getting the results I want, and how do I go about actually kind of instilling this like change I want to see in myself?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people a lot of people tend to change from a place of dissatisfaction, don't they? Like they're motivated to make a change because things aren't working properly. I guess, if things were working properly, they wouldn't need to make a change. Um, but I also think that sometimes, there's all sorts of reasons I think that people don't have, that don't invest in coaching. And, I think for a lot of people, it's just like a financial outlay that they don't really consider as an option because it's quite an expensive thing to do. I think some people maybe don't see the value in it. Sometimes I think people have worked with personal trainers in the past who may not have been particularly experienced, or they may not have got particular benefits from working with them. And I can definitely see, I can see that, like having worked with different people in my past. I mean, for the most part, I've worked with pretty clued up people, but I can, think of a couple of examples from the past where I've worked with people and kind of and look back and think that wasn't perhaps the best use of my resources at the time. And it can be hard to tell the difference, I think, and again, because of the reasons of things like marketing and stuff like that. And again, like what we were saying with online coaching, you don't necessarily get feedback in real time. The same is, the gym doesn't always give you feedback in real time. It doesn't take, days or weeks or even months sometimes to make the kind of progress that we want to make. And sometimes we make progress even in the context of bad decisions and bad practices. Like there've been definitely have been times when I've made great progress with bad coaches objectively. And it's because you're making progress despite, some less than optimal situations. And I guess that's the point, is that things don't have to be perfect in order for us to make progress, but it's better for them to be better so that we're taking less risks, I guess.
Hmm. You mentioned like people change from a point of dissatisfaction, and think this is a obviously this is an interesting kind of road to go down, because like would you consider that to be a useful way to actually start the change cycle?
So this is a big conversation, isn't it? Because I think a lot of the evidence tells us that, changing from a place of shame or self-hatred or anything like that, is a bad thing, is not sort of as likely to be successful as changing from a place of wanting to do better by yourself, wanting to improve things, right? So using kind of positive motivators, I think, scientifically is more likely to be successful than using negative indicators. But I've had this conversation a lot of times with a lot of people, and there are sort of some things that I always wonder a little bit about. Like, if you aren't a little bit dissatisfied, if there's something that you're a little bit unhappy about, then it's hard, I think, sometimes for people to find the motivation to make change, because change itself can be quite uncomfortable. So a lot of people talk about, being uncomfortable enough to change in order to change. And I think a lot of it is how we frame it. I think there's a lot to be said for, like, if you think badly of yourself, if you think that you're a failure, or if you're ashamed of yourself, then it does make it harder for you to think that you're capable of change, and therefore for you to then be able to change. So I think that is true. I don't think that a little bit of dissatisfaction stops you from being able to do that, though. I think that it might be harder in some ways, but sometimes it is the trigger, I think, that people need. I think if people are totally satisfied, then they're unlikely to make change. So it is a really hard one to have. But I don't want to, I don't want to just go, that is what the science tells us. Changing from a place of shame is less likely to be successful than changing from a place of self-love, etc. But I think you can sort of, I was going to say do both, but what I mean more by that is that you can accept that things aren't right, or that you have some dissatisfaction with how things are, without it descending into shame and those kind of really negative thoughts about yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the way I try to frame it is like dissatisfaction and starting from that place could be equivalent to like the flint and the lighter. You the flint will get the spark going, but you need something else to sustain that. Like, even just thinking from my own perspective, like doing bodybuilding, like I know that my legs can be bigger, right? But I like I might look at my legs in the mirror and be like, oh, they're small, like I need to grow them. But that's not like something that's driving me. I'm not thinking about when I'm in the gym doing like my leg extension or whatever like that. I'm like, gotta grow these fucking matchsticks. There's something else that kind of drives it. But yeah, as you're kind of saying there, like if it is the case that like you're a piece of shit, like you really need to go to the gym, or like you're a failure, and then you get to the gym and you want to leave because it's not something like intrinsically you really want to do you don't really want to do it for the sake of bettering yourself. You see it as something that you should be doing, and you hear people saying, "Oh, aren't you so great? You should be grateful to be able to go to gym because some people don't have this opportunity." And then you're like, "Why am I not grateful for doing this type of thing?" And then it makes you feel even worse about yourself. It is, yeah. It's a challenging one. I guess I've worked with people who have kind of came at their process from this point of view, and it's always been extremely difficult to work with, because as like optimistic as I can be, and as inquisitive as I can be in regards to asking questions, I find sometimes as well people have these dissatisfactions about either something going on internally, past traumas. It could be something to do with their physique or whatever. They are probably something that's, like, depending how far down along the way are, I would say probably better off getting like therapy to a degree.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's kind of a cover for something else, isn't it? So people aren't really, it's not that they're unhappy with their physique as such, it's that their physique is maybe not where it should be, because they're unhappy with themselves, and because there's that sort of underlying trauma, like you say. And then, yeah, it's not a coach that they need, it's a therapist. But I don't know, like I think and I think, like, because you spoke about bodybuilding specifically, and I think that is a place where, I can't really imagine how it works in that world, because it's the whole point is that you're never going to be good enough, because there's always more that you can do, and because you're trying to reach this kind of unattainable pinnacle of of just getting better and better, and you can always be bigger, and you can always be leaner, and all that sort of stuff. And then bits of body dysmorphia come into it as well. So I think that it is, I guess it also depends on how important aesthetics is for you. And I think that sometimes, I think depending on your own mentality and your own mindset, sometimes having too much emphasis on aesthetics and appearance for some people can be inherently really difficult, really challenging, because all it does is bring up shame. All they'll ever focus on is not being good enough, not being big enough, not being lean enough. And it's fascinating because some people don't like don't travel in that mindset at all, and they're doing the same thing and they're achieving the same stuff, but they just have a much more relaxed attitude towards it, and they just really enjoy the process. And I guess that kind of comes back to what you said about enjoying being in the gym and enjoying doing stuff. And I think that was one of the first things that I learned when I first started training, was that I didn't think that I was interested in the training. I thought that the training was a means to an end. I thought that I was doing it because I wanted to lose weight. And that's what I was doing at the time. But then when my first ever coach was kind of teaching me how to do barbell squats and deadlifts and stuff like that, and the weight was going up on the bar, I was getting the same kind of positive feedback and the same kick out of that as I was from the weight going down on the scale.
Mhm.
So sometimes I think it's about teaching people that what they think that they want isn't actually the be all and end all, and there are other things that will give them as much happiness, joy, whatever you want to call it, satisfaction, as the thing that is nagging at them internally. And there's lots of other ways to look at that change more positively. So then you have a situation where you might have a few weeks where the scale weight doesn't go down, but you can go as the coach, but look, your deadlift numbers have improved, your squat numbers have improved. Oh, look at your measurements have actually improved as well. You're getting stronger, and that's just as important as getting lighter, if not more important in many situations. So I think that that it's not necessarily about trying to teach people not to have that shame, because I think, again, that's more the job of a therapist than it is of a coach. But it's about trying to show them alternatives. Like, here's what you could be happy about. Here's what you could be proud of. Here's what you could look at positively, rather than just focusing on this, this negative aspect of your journey.
Yeah, like one thing I actually have on my check-in sheets, and I've had it for as long as I can remember now, is like just 3 points for a gratitude list. It comes after the struggle section of the check-in list of the check-in process, just because whatever negative part they just unloaded into that part, now they have to come to the next step, which is tell me 3 things that you're happy with. Because it is a very useful thing for people to get in the habit of, because there's always something that you can look at, no matter how big or small, that you can be thankful for. It could be that the sun rose this morning, that it's not raining outside, whatever the fuck it may be. But like, just the small things, and if you can recognize small things, it's a lot easier to then obviously acknowledge twice the big things. I think one thing you mentioned there was regards to you kind of finding other ways to win, versus like if somebody's going through a fat loss process, like of course they want to see the likes of their physique changing, they want to see the scale weight go down. Yeah, definitely one huge thing that I'm big on is like getting people to think as if they can win every day, no matter what like the scale says, right? So it could be a case that, okay, cool, you've had 5 out of 7 days hitting your protein within the kind of range that we agreed upon. You've hit your steps every single day this week, whatever it may be. Just these small little kind of habits or behaviors, because I think one thing I find that people struggle with a lot is that like over obsession with the outcome, right? It's a very classic thing, right? Like, and people always say, enjoy the process, don't focus too much on the outcome, focus on the process, and the outcome will take care of itself. I guess it's a cliche because it is true, but it also does kind of give you satisfaction in the day to day, because it can be really frustrating, like getting to the end of the week and maybe seeing that your average scale weight is the same, and then when that's the sole focus and you haven't kind of put any value in the other things, that you just feel down yourself. And for some people, if they're not working with a coach, that can cause them to like slash their calories, go mad in cardio, and just be mega restrictive. Happens all the time. And then all of a sudden they've restricted so much that they end up like reversing, and this like yo-yo effect takes place over time.
Yeah.
And just having that like bit of oversight or objectivity, or being able to like zoom out and look at everything that you have done well across the week, can be so beneficial because you're thinking here about like things that you're realistically going to do for a long period of time, like not outside the fat loss phase, habits that you're going to continue till you're old and grey. So I
Yeah,
think, yeah, go on.
I mean, I think that, yeah, it's absolutely classic that, like, look at the processes rather than the outcomes, because, and again, this is the argument that we have about when people talk about weight loss and obesity, and there's all of these arguments on social media about, the kind of the politics of obesity and the sociology of obesity and things like that. And we remember that obesity isn't a behavior, weight gain isn't a behavior, and weight loss isn't a behavior. The behaviors are all of those individual things that play into it. And so instead of just telling people to lose weight, which is what people have been being told to do for the last 40 years, we should be telling people to do more physical activity, do more resistance training, eat these foods, try and eat less of these foods, things like that. And I think that the point is that those are the things that you can win at every day. You can set yourself a step goal and do the steps. You can't say, I'm going to lose a kilo this week, because you might not, for whatever reason. And even if you lose a kilo that week, you might not lose a kilo again the following week. But the thing that you can do consistently are the habits. So the whole point of what to do is to not focus on the outcomes, but to focus on the habits that will ultimately lead you to those outcomes, even if they don't lead you to those outcomes consistently week in, week out. They will eventually. And I think that, it's probably one of the most ignored pieces of advice, and I ignore it as well. Like, absolutely, I'll do all of the things, and then I'll be annoyed that the scale didn't reward me with the number that I wanted. That's classic human behavior, because we want the outcomes. It's not
Mm, yeah.
abnormal. We are doing it for the outcomes, but actually trying to put those outcomes aside doesn't always lead to putting the outcomes aside. But just the act of going, well, I'm not going to focus entirely on those, I'm going to focus on the behaviors, means that then when you don't get the outcome that you desire, your goal for the following week is to still focus on the behaviors. And so trying to do that, regardless of what the outcome is what will lead you to the outcomes eventually anyway.
Mm. And I guess like on the pathway to even like trying to develop those processes, there's obviously going to be obstacles and everything that do get in the way. And I guess there's also going to be previous habits that are maybe unhelpful that can drive people further away from the process itself, or just make it harder to form like those new pathways, like whether it is, in the evening time versus once you get in, you go, like, versus going straight home after work, you go to the gym, or versus, a simple example, take an elevator, you take the stairs, or like, you plan in your weekly shop into your week, where you start doing like meal prep, if that's something that you've found has been helpful for you. So I guess like when we're talking about like trying to create like new habits for people and trying to help them with kind of develop these processes, what do you think are some things for people to consider?
Again, I think it depends a lot on the people, and it depends a lot on what their natural habits, or what habits there are that they've developed already. Because forming new habits isn't just about building the new habits; it's about kind of destroying the old habits as well, which I think can be just as hard as forming new habits. Um, I mean, look, I guess you can read a book like Atomic Habits and hear all of these excellent strategies in terms of like habit formation. But I think a lot of it comes really from just kind of living and learning. Like, I think that most people who have developed positive habits, or who've gone through kind of a process of behavior change, have tried all the rubbish stuff first, and have tried all the ways of doing things that aren't particularly effective. Um, and I think sometimes that's the most powerful way of learning what works, is kind of just trying and just doing a bit of trial and error until you figure out what does work. But there's lots of things that help, things like habit stacking, like, doing things together, whereby you associate one habit with another. Like, let's say, for example, if you're trying to incorporate gratitude into your life, so you go, right, every time I'm brushing my teeth for 2 minutes, I'm going to think about the things that I'm grateful for, because you're going to brush your teeth. twice a day, right? So you're going to be thinking about that every day because you're associating it with that other thing. Whereas if you go, I'm going to take 2 minutes every day to think about what I'm grateful for, you might not get around to it because you're busy doing other stuff all day. It's not part of your day. And so for me, like, I think it's always, and again, everyone's different, but little, small, tiny, incremental changes rather than trying to do everything all at once and trying to just overhaul your entire life at the same time. I always use this story as an example, but when I first started, there was grenade bars,
Oh yeah.
the protein bars. So Grenade did like a collaboration. They set up a gym with Jamie Alderton back a few years ago, and I joined that gym. And when I joined the gym, they had these free Metcon classes that they did in the mornings. And I remember hearing about them, and I was like, "Oh, it's such a shame because they're like at 6:30 in the morning." And I've never been to the gym before work before, because the idea of getting up earlier than I normally would to go to work, to go to the gym, and I'm going to be tired. Like, I've always been to the gym after work on my way home, because then the day is done, I can do what I want. And then so I was like, oh, but it's such a shame because I'd really love to try one of these sessions. So the sessions were at 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. So I decided to book a half day off work because I was so convinced that the day would be impossible if I'd been to the gym. So I had a half day, went to this 6:30 class, and I went to work and I was like, I feel okay. This is fine. Like, actually, I'm enjoying it. I'm in a better mood than I would normally be. I had enough time to have a shower and stuff after the class and then get to work just in time to start my clinic. So I started going to this gym class regularly, and it was going really well. And I started to think, you know what? It's really tight for time. I'm kind of getting into work. I've got like a minute to log on before my first patient arrives. It's all just a little bit too tight. I wonder if I could go to the 5:30 class and stop and have breakfast at the gym afterwards, have a bit more of a relaxed time getting ready, and ended up doing that. And I feel like if you had told me before, oh, just go to this gym class at 5:30 and you'll have a great day and it will be fine, I don't think that would have worked for me because it was too much in one go. But going through all of those steps of firstly figuring out that I was able to go to the gym before work and then still do a productive day at work without, and still be okay. And actually, as it turned out, it suits me much better. Every time I never go to the gym after work anymore, because when I do, I'm tired, I'm hungry, all I want to do is get home, and I'm rushing through the session so that I can get home faster, or I'm so unmotivated that I'm getting through the session so slowly that I get home really late. But it was figuring out that I could do it in the morning, full stop, and then figuring out that I could do it at 5:30 a.m. was completely life changing. But I think it had to happen in those stages. Otherwise, it would have. If I tried at 5:30, I just probably would have been too tired. Would have tried it once and gone, nah, this isn't for me. I've not got enough sleep. I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like the making mistakes and kind of going through the trial and error process is just part of it. Like, as you said, like, to try to form a new habit, like it takes a lot of time and it's very hard to break the old habits. And something like that, right? Like where you're getting up that little bit earlier to go to the gym. Like I've never really trained early in the morning. Like, obviously when I was training like personal training clients, I had to be up at that time to train them. I've never really done it myself, but like, have number of clients who have went through that process of evening time train, typically an evening time trainee, and then all of a sudden they notice that their adherence is not as good to evening training session. Like, will I switch to the morning sessions? Oh, I don't know if I'm willing to accept the strength loss I might have initially. And then they do it, and their numbers are a little bit down for like maybe a week or so. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter, does it? Like, because like if you are more adherent to the gym long term with that slight change in schedule, then it's worth like the short term sacrifice. I think a lot of people are, when it does come to changing their habits and behaviors, I think it's the fear of like it not working out, or having maybe too much of a fear of like what the repercussions of it not working out are, right? Like, if you miss a day of like, I don't know, prepping your meals, or if you miss a day of like tracking your food, or you miss a day of training or whatever it may be, like if you're doing it for long enough, like you will form different types of systems and strategies to reduce those chances popping up again. But you also will figure out that, like, along the way, that if you miss a day of doing things, it doesn't really turn out to have like any major negative repercussions. Really, it's just a case of, okay, that was a mistake. Why did it happen? Okay, can I improve upon that for next time? Cool. Okay, I know what to do next time. I think a lot of people, when they have that, like, at least mindset around that, these mistakes can happen because life is chaotic, right? Like, there's lots of different things that get in our way. Like, you could have, geez, your washing machine breaks and you have to spend all day at home with the plumber, so you miss your gym session, whatever, like that. Like, these things are going to happen as part of life. And I think having that accepting type of mindset is super important. And I guess, like, also one thing that, like, people are trying to kind of battle when it does come to forming these new habits is the cognitive load of actually trying to take on something new, right? Have you found anything useful in this regard? So, like, a lot of people maybe kind of put a lot of like weight into the likes of planning to help with this. To, like, again, you talked about habit stacking, was it? That's like obviously one way to reduce cognitive load. But have you found other kind of ways to essentially allow people to be more intentional with kind of setting up these habits and behaviors without it feeling as if it is taking up too much mental bandwidth?
I mean, for me, like, coaching is the big one. So for me, going to group coaching 3 times a week and knowing that all I have to figure out is waking up, getting dressed, driving to the gym and walking through the door, and everything else is done for me. And it's a huge privilege. Like, I know that it's not sort of something that everybody will necessarily have access to, but it is 3 times a week of a total no-brainer. Like, I can't, even if I have a rubbish session with in kind of group coaching, in context, it's still better than a lot of my best sessions on my own, because when you're on your own, you have to figure out how to do everything. Oh, I can't find the right handle for this exercise. I just won't do it. All of the things that every time there's a problem that comes up, you have to solve it yourself. Whereas if you're in group coaching, you're like, oh, my shoulder hurts when I do this. Cool, do this instead, straight away. Someone else is kind of doing all the thinking for you. I mean, I'm a big fan of, like, reducing friction wherever possible. And again, like, I completely accept that there's a lot of privilege in that. There are a lot of things that, even we're talking about meal prep. Some people will prep all of their meals on a Sunday when they know they've got a couple of hours of free downtime. Some people don't have downtime on a Sunday. They don't have the possibility of being able to do that. Some people can afford to buy all their meals from a meal prep company. Some people cannot. So there's lots of different ways around what people are and aren't able to do. Even like nowadays, and there's a lot of stick that's given to things like ultra processed foods and stuff like that, but the amount of variety and stuff that you can get from a Lidl or an Aldi, in terms of even things like high protein ready meals and snacks and stuff like that you couldn't do 10-15 years ago. There are a lot of ways of reducing friction, which are not always necessarily the optimal ways of reducing friction. Like, so for example, for me, I think that there are definitely some skills in the gym that I haven't developed to my full potential because I'm always outsourcing them to other people. So you would think that now I could maybe write myself my own gym program. And maybe if I really sat down and tried to figure it out, maybe I would be able to. But I don't really think that I would be able to, because I've never had to do my own programming. And so I think there's something to be said for, like, if, for a lot of people, the cognitive load will reduce as you do more of it yourself, but then you have to do different things at different times and focus on different things at different times. But sometimes outsourcing that cognitive load to somebody else can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, of course, because, like, I guess when you are outsourcing it, you are going to do the things that are, like, more essential towards developing the habit. And you'll obviously have the things that are conditional, but then you'll also avoid the things that are just, like, not effective whatsoever, which, of course, with so much information online as regards to how to achieve any goal, it can be very frustrating. Like, of course, you mentioned ultra processed foods there, right? And like how, again, it all gets like lumped into like one category. Like, you know, when the general person is talking about it, but like there's obviously like the Nova classifications of everything, right? So there's obviously a big difference between a donut and then like your high protein yogurt, right? Both ultra processed foods, but completely different outcomes if you were to if you were to put it into a diet, right? So I guess like with that now, right? And we're kind of coming on to maybe some of the more environmental things that are maybe making it harder for people to change behaviors. With ultra processed foods, I guess like what would be something for people to consider when it does come to like maybe incorporating more of them into the diet. Like you did mention already there with the likes of the more ready meals that do make things convenient for people and do make it a little bit easier to like follow a fat loss protocol or follow a muscle gain protocol or just like have a generally healthy diet. But also are other things that maybe people maybe look out for when it does come to incorporate more of the hyper palatable ones.
Yeah, I think again it's just worth putting into context what the what the purpose is of that ultra processed food, what it brings to your life and what it potentially takes away. What is it replacing? I think is the key thing. So like if you are having a a chocolate protein mousse, and what is it replacing in your diet, right? So if it is replacing a regular chocolate mousse, which is also ultra processed, then to me that's a movement in the right direction. But if it's like, oh, actually, I'm not going to bother eating fresh chicken breast and seasoning it and cooking it, I'm just going to have a chocolate protein mousse instead. It's probably not an ideal switch. It's probably not an ideal switch away from even things like whey protein and stuff like that in terms of the protein quality and the nutrient quality. But for me, yeah, it's so much important what is it actually replacing? What are you using it for? If you are having a high protein ready meal instead of having a frozen pizza, then to me it's a no-brainer. Of course, the optimal diet consists mainly of minimally processed whole foods, with a high amount of fruit and vegetables, a good amount of fiber, a good amount of protein, lots of water. But sometimes the reality is different. Like I remember a time that you could stop off at a service station, and if you were hungry, it was literally chocolate or crisps or sandwiches or fast food. There wasn't really any other option. But now you could have a ready to drink protein shake or even a protein bar. And those are arguably better options than a pasty, right?
Yeah.
So again, I think context is so much more important than this kind of arbitrary idea of ultra processed foods being bad. Should we reduce the amount of ultra processed foods that we are consuming in our diet generally as Western society? Yes, 100%. But that doesn't mean that all processed foods are created equal.
Yeah, I think it's the case that like a lot of them, especially the ones that are like more more available in supermarkets relative to previous times, like chocolate bars and crisps and biscuits have always been around, but it's only been like the last like 5 to 10 years where we have like nice tasting protein bars. We have like decent yogurts, like decent protein pots, all these kind of things that can help nudge somebody closer to the direction that they want to go. Because
Absolutely.
I think one thing that you see all the time with social media, especially, is you'll have people again not kind of deciphering like the differences between different types of ultra processed foods, and not actually having them in the categories of like okay, these like deep fried fucking apple fritters versus a protein bar, completely different things, right? Like is the protein bar still a protein bar, like, and kind of just a higher protein version of a Mars bar? Yes, but at the same time, somebody looking to get a little bit more protein into their diet, is it a better option than having the Mars bar itself? Yeah, probably. Are you going to say it's a better option than having the chicken breast in there? Yeah, probably not. But are they gonna have a chicken breast as a snack? Unlikely. So one is nudging the person closer to the diet that they want to have, and again, it's not necessarily the case that we're trying to solve somebody's maybe diet setup in 1 week or in one session of like me doing like one check-in with somebody. It's like over time, and I think, I guess from a coaching perspective, you're also thinking about what are the most effective things for me to change it, like from a strategic point of view, and what things do we not necessarily need to worry about that much, right? So from the context of somebody having more ultra processed yogurts in the diet, right? High protein ultra processed yogurts. I'm not that concerned about like the sweeteners in it, but you might have on social media then somebody saying, okay, sucralose is going to give you cancer. And then the person's like, oh, well, now I can't have now I can't have the yogurts because it's going to give you cancer. I should get something else. That something else is way more expensive. It's going to drain down their budget. They're less likely to be consistent with it. And then over time, they haven't really kind of made any changes because now they have a much shorter list of foods that they perceive to be healthy or to nudge them in the direction that they want to go. So it's like being healthy is too hard, too expensive. So what's the point? Like, and then they just revert to the old behaviors, and then that's that's something that I definitely struggle to combat against as a coach.
Yeah, and again, I think it's the same old argument that we have, because everybody is like, oh, Diet Coke's unhealthy, aspartame is unhealthy, or, all of these things that people have legitimate concerns about, like, is Diet Coke full of chemicals that offer you no nutritional value? Yeah, it is, right? There's no arguing about that. So if you're drinking water all the time, am I going to tell you you should drink Diet Coke? No, because you're already drinking something that is arguably better for you than Diet Coke. Like, water is better for you than Diet Coke. That doesn't mean that Diet Coke gives you cancer. And I think this is where everything goes wrong, is that the problem is that what people want to say is that the best thing that you could possibly drink, or the most healthful drink that you can have for hydration is water, right? Unless you start talking about electrolytes and things like that, whatever. So that can be the case, but that doesn't mean that Diet Coke isn't healthier for you than what you are currently drinking. Because is Diet Coke healthier for you than drinking Coke? Yes, it is. Is it healthier for you than drinking, other full sugar drinks? Yeah, of course it is. Is it healthier for you than drinking beer? Yes. Is it healthier for you than drinking wine? Yes. All of this stuff is on a spectrum. So if you are trying to give somebody, like, I used to drink like gallons of Coke back in the day. Absolutely loved it. If you had told me to only drink water instead of Coke, that change in my behavior would have lasted a grand total of a week and a half, because I would have been so bored with what I was drinking. It was such a mismatch between, what I enjoyed drinking and what I was now currently drinking, that it would have been unsustainable for me, and I would have gone back to drinking Coke. That all or nothing mindset can be really, like, unprofitable for people, basically, because it means that then when they don't succeed at that thing that they think is the only way to succeed, then their only other option is failure, and is to just go back to where they've gone, and just to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But if somebody who drinks 2 liters of Coke a day switches to drinking 2 liters of Diet Coke a day, that is a move in the right direction. Now, am I, after 2 years, going to say to them, look, you've been drinking 2 liters of Diet Coke a day for the last 2 years. Do you think you need to drink that much Diet Coke? Do you think maybe you could replace a couple of glasses of Diet Coke with some water or something like that instead? That would be then another move in the right direction. Again, it depends what your goal is, right? It depends if your goal is longevity or health or fat loss or whatever. If your goal is purely fat loss, then yes, we know it doesn't matter. But I think we should always be mindful of health. And there are lots of reasons why drinking Diet Coke isn't a great idea in high quantities, even just from dental health perspectives, right? It's not just about, life isn't just about fat loss. And I think this is sometimes another thing that we can often forget in this sort of industry. But that doesn't mean that it can't be a move in the right direction. But it doesn't also mean that you can't then do a little bit better a little bit of a while afterwards. And I think this is the thing that I think sometimes gets lost. So when I first started doing flexible dieting, it was great because it meant that I didn't have to demonize food. I could eat a bit of whatever I wanted. That was all fantastic. But as a former very overweight person who really likes a lot of, junk food, basically. I was starting to manipulate flexible dieting to go with my older preferences, and I was falling into habits that were not particularly healthful. So my peak of this was when I realized that if I cut out the broccoli from my lunch and dinner, I could replace it with a Solero because they're only 97 calories. Now, that's not a move in the right direction. That means that I'm having something extra that I enjoy, and it might make my diet more sustainable, but it's not making it more healthful. It's actively making it less healthful, even though the calories are equal, right? So that is probably something that I don't think is a good idea, and that ultimately I stopped doing. But I think it's really easy to kind of manipulate it and to forget that the goal isn't just it's like someone who quits smoking who takes up vaping to quit smoking in the belief that vaping is slightly better than smoking, but still the aim has got to be to come off it completely, right? So it's meant to be a step in the right direction, not now I vape, therefore it's healthy, I can do it as much as I want, right? So I think the point is that behavior change, we kind of say all this stuff about, okay, small incremental changes. Yeah, that's great, but that is with the focus of to continue to keep going, not to think that because you've made one of those changes, that's it, you've conquered behavior change, right?
Hmm. Do you think like the world of social media and how, I guess, how within reach it seems to be to get like these amazing like results like these, like extremely muscular physiques or fucking whatever it would be, high levels of strength? Do you think this kind of becomes a barrier to some people actually getting into the gym first and foremost? Because
Yeah,
I
because
guess
it's not the reality for a lot of people. I think it's really interesting when you look at because transformations are marketing more than anything else, I think. And I have, I was a member of a gym that was mainly focused on transformations. I did a transformation myself. Um, and it's so like, it's not that they're not real, they are absolutely real, but they're a snapshot. And like, in certain circumstances, everybody can achieve an impressive before and after picture, right? But that isn't actually what's impressive about behavior change. What's impressive is the onward journey, what happens after that transformation. It's not a photo of you kind of tanned up to your eyeballs, um, and at the perfect angle in the perfect lighting with a little bit of editing. It is showing up to the gym when you're a bit tired and would rather stay in bed. It's about making healthy choices. The transformation isn't going to be what makes you healthy or what gives you kind of more longevity. Um, and I guess, you know, it's hardly surprising that when we have poured all this energy and effort into an app that's based on sharing photos of ourselves, that most people are going to depict their health changes in the form of a transformation photo. What did we expect? Of course, that's going to happen. But I think what I would like to see is for people to look past what the transformation is, not just for themselves, but in other people, but really more for themselves. So to not just be doing it to get the picture, to not just be going, oh, I can't believe it. I can see abs now. So what? Cool. But it's not, the abs aren't doing anything. You're doing something. The value is actually in you and what you're doing, not just in how lean you're getting. And of course, like, that doesn't necessarily apply. Like, if, in things like competitive bodybuilding, of course, things like abs matter. So it depends what your focus is and what you're trying to change and where you're trying to get to. But I think also it's really interesting because you look at a transformation picture and you just see the transformation. You don't see what's been done to get
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
Um, and actually, some people have got there through doing the same things that other people have done, but they have different genetics, or they have different preferences when it comes to what types of food they prefer to eat. or they have a different training background. So a before picture of somebody looking overweight, you don't know what kind of like muscle structure they have underneath that. In a lot of cases, there can be a lot of people who look completely untrained when they're carrying a bit of body fat, and once they strip their body fat down, it reveals, a muscle structure that they've had, since they were in their late teens, from a mixture of genetics and maybe when they were training when they were younger. And that doesn't mean that somebody who takes up training when they're 35 is going to get that sort of result in 12 weeks, even if they look the same as that person 12 weeks before. So it's about expectations and what you kind of want out of a transformation, but also what is achievable. And you only really know what's achievable if you do it. And the doing of it is what's getting you to do good stuff anyway. So just do it, I think.
Yeah, I think.
Ramble.
Yeah, I think obviously like transformation pictures are definitely like one side of it, and I think sometimes with the transformation pictures it can be unhelpful if it's stated like how long it's taken for that person to achieve X result, because for some people achieving that result that theoretical person has achieved can take a lot longer. Like it could be like a number of months to years, right? So it does almost kind of set people up for failure to a degree if they're coming into it with the expectation of like, I can achieve this in like 12 weeks, It rarely happens. Like a lot of times I think like when coaches put up stuff like that, they mention the time, they want people to be like, oh my God, wow, look what he can do in like it's such a short period of time, Look, ultimately that is marketing, and I do understand it. One thing I do think social media has maybe been helpful for, however, is while that side of things is like as busy as ever with people sharing transformation pictures, there's definitely a lot more like sharing of sporting events. So whether that's, I'm not into high rocks myself, but I think it's a positive thing that's been pushed into the industry because it's getting people to focus on a more performance-based endeavor that does seem pretty, like it has a relatively low barrier to entry, right? Like I'm pretty sure it's like divided up into like different skill levels, I think.
I think it's definitely kind of seems to be more achievable in terms of doing a high rocks. It's not necessarily competing or winning a high rocks, but like, doing it definitely seems to have a kind of a more accessible kind of barrier to entry, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not high rocks myself either. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I just think that there's something for everyone now in the fitness industry. Like 10, 15 years ago, the fitness industry was only about being lean and shredded. But now there definitely seems to be a lot better focus on, what can the fitness industry do for you, your life, your community, your connection with other people. It does really seem to be a move in the right direction. But there's always this bit of me that kind of figures, I don't know if that's just because I'm now 10 years older than I was when I first got into the fitness industry, and there's now all these people coming into it that are still exposed to all of the same sort of stuff that we were, but it's just that as I've grown through it, so has everybody else in those circles, and we are now all focused on different things. But I guess that's the thing, is it's about kind of opening up the fact that there's something for everybody in this, and it doesn't always have to be about the same thing for everybody, and there's always going to be different people that are motivated by different outcomes and by different processes, and it's about finding what works for you.
Yeah, I think kind of come back to something we talked about earlier in regards to the person who's kind of forcing himself to have to go to the gym. And I think there are obviously a lot of people who feel like they have to force themselves to go to the gym, and they have to almost force themselves to like a particular way of training. And it's just the case they haven't been exposed to different ways of doing things. And I think this is like one of the issues maybe with there being so much access to information online. It's very easy to find in the bodybuilding world, there's a big emphasis on like the optimal way to do things. The optimal way to do things may not be fun. It might just be like somebody's complete like opposite idea of what enjoyment may be. And like one thing I'm really grateful for is that like I started training when there wasn't a huge amount of information online, and I tried a lot of different things. I tried a lot of different programs. So I was able to find out exactly what I liked, exercise I love, exercise I hate, and just over time then that push you to do the things that you enjoy more, because I wouldn't turn up to the gym if I truly didn't enjoy it despite my goals, because you have to have a base level of enjoyment. And I think that's just something that a lot of people get mixed up. Like, you don't have to follow a bodybuilding program. Like, bodybuilding programs can be very boring, and like powerlifting as well. Like, I did powerlifting for years, and to a lot of people, it can just be like, you're just doing the same thing over and over again for weeks and weeks and weeks. Do you not change it? Like, well, maybe chopping and change your program every couple of weeks is probably not the best idea for those specific goals of gaining as much muscle over time or getting as strong as you can over time. If like maybe chop and change things keeps you in the gym long term, like you're still probably going to get to the end destination. It's just going to take a longer period of time really to get there, So I think that's a very important thing for people to take into consideration. Like, you do have to make your training and make the process somewhat fun. I guess the question for you here, right, and I think this is kind of following along with something I mentioned there, right, is misinformation naturally is extremely prevalent all over social media. Coming into like the new year now, people are going to be exposed to whole different hosts of ways to change your behavior, change your eating, like, change your training. What do you think is some important things for people to look out for when it does come to like maybe characteristics of posts or lines of thinking that would be kind of typically like misinformed posts?
I think one of the biggest things for me is kind of absolute statements like, oh, this exercise is completely useless, or this is completely pointless, or you have to do this exercise if you want to achieve X, Y, or Z. I think that one of the things that's usually missing from misinformation type posts is nuance. There's not very many. It depends. I think that it's really hard. Like, it genuinely is difficult to navigate for misinformation online because it is so prevalent. Like, it's almost impossible to scroll anywhere without finding it. And I think part of the problem with that is the newer algorithms on social media that show us a lot of content from people that we don't follow. So you're seeing content and you don't know that's whether that person is a trustworthy person or somebody who is a peddler of misinformation. And it's really interesting because I sort of see it on my own feed, and when it's about topics that I know about, I know it's misinformation. But if it's about topics I don't know about, like it, and sometimes it is because it will be about, music or other stuff that I'm interested in, that I'll see stuff on my feed about, I'll have no idea whether it's correct or not. And, I find myself struggling to know, who to trust and who not to trust. And it sounds almost paranoid when you describe it like that. But I think that's why it's so important to kind of figure out some trustworthy sources of information and look at, who are those people following? Who are they sort of endorsing? Who are they reposting posts from? But again, you're still getting into shaky territory because I'm not a big fan of trusting people, because people usually make mistakes or turn out to be not as trustworthy as you think that you'd like them to be. So kind of developing your own kind of skills and your own ways of discerning whether or not something is reasonable or not, having some websites that to look at for good research summaries and things like that, like examine.com, places like that where you can look up research summaries and often have summaries written by people who are trustworthy. So even if you're not necessarily qualified or able to read studies or want to read loads of literature, you can find a summary from somebody who you think is relatively unbiased.
Yeah, it can be very difficult, especially with, you mentioned algorithms there, and if you fall into a certain echo chamber, like you can't even really hear like an opposite side of like the opposite side of the aisle. Like, obviously very common in nutrition is like, there's the carnivores, and then on the opposite side is like the people who are like, oh, well, like, probably eating mostly saturated fat as your only fat source, probably not a great idea. But like, it sounds very appealing. Like, they can be very like, quote unquote, science based. Like, they can have like give you the mechanism behind all these different things, why seed oils or whatever like that are bad. But maybe that's not necessarily something that is like in line with like reality, or in line with like, the actual scientific consensus. But you may not know that because the consensus you see online is all the other carnivores saying all those seed oil soy boys are idiots, you know. So it can be extremely difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Basically, anyone that uses the term soy boy probably not to be trusted.
Yeah, I think like as you mentioned there, like nuance really important. The absolute statements, like that's obviously a big one. I think another big one for me is like when people give like single causes for specific diseases. Like, you know, obviously very common one there is like sugar being like the root of all evil. Um, what's another big one? Like obviously like appealing to the authority, or just simply just using the likes of mechanisms all the time to explain exactly why they are kind of doing a certain approach. Like that was a big that's a big one. Like in the hypertrophy training side of things, you'll have a lot of people just spouting like different mechanisms for, you know, muscle growth, but then when it's actually painted alongside the likes of longitudinal research, they don't seem to hold up. And I think that's a important thing. But again, like most people don't have that like initial frame of thought to come with, right? Like when you like Diary of a CEO is a perfect example. Like there's so many different guests on that like just completely conflict with information off each other. Like if you were to actually like listen to all of the episodes, you would have no idea what to do because one guy contradicts the next one.
It's like the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
The Daily Mail will have an article about some drug, and it will say this is the worst drug ever, and it's going to cause you all these side effects, and all of these things have happened because of it, and then the next issue of it will say that it's the best drug ever, and it's like it's just different writers having different points of view. And I think one of the most interesting jobs I've ever had to do was I used to get sent an article, and I'd have to it'd be like a mainstream newspaper article or mainstream news article about something to do with health, and my job would be to go and look up the actual research that it was based on and comment on it and rate the article, like rate the kind of conclusions of the article based on the conclusions of the actual study that it was talking about. And it was really like, it was fascinating because they were almost always terrible. It wasn't like even a competition. It was like you just knew it was going to be. I mean, one of the worst ones was um it was a thing about cherry juice being effective to treat blood pressure, and it was like cherry juice could be the secret ingredient to, to treating your blood pressure, and you could ditch your blood pressure medication if you drink cherry juice, like in the Daily Mail or whatever. In the actual study, it was like a comically bad study. It was like 5 people who were all men and all between the age of 30 and 40 or something, and none of whom actually had high blood pressure. But they gave them cherry juice and measured their blood pressure like an hour later and 2 hours later and 8 hours later or something. But there was no like long-term data about using cherry juice like every day. It was just literally that was it. And some of them, their blood pressure came down a bit, but there was no controlling for any other variables or anything like that. I can't remember the exact details, but it was bad. And it was funded by the Cherry Marketing Association of America or something like that. It was you couldn't make it up. And yet there was no mention of any of this in the article. It was just like, wow, this study shows that people's blood pressure dropped when they took cherry juice.
Yeah.
Which is like, again, it's fine if people don't then go and go, oh, I'm going to replace my blood pressure medications with cherry juice. Because that's where the harm comes in. It's fine to go, oh, this is an interesting finding. Cool. I'll read the article. I'll put it in the bin. But the problem is this real risk of causing harm when you overstate, things like research findings. But, nothing that they said in the article was untrue. There was a study which showed that people's blood pressure dropped when they took cherry juice. That is the truth. That is what it showed. But it's not clinically relevant.
Yeah. I think like one of the biggest issues with stuff like that, right? And like using research as like ways to either promote a certain approach or strategy, especially when it is like research that nobody's going to like look at the PubMed link realistically, like even if you put it in like an Instagram caption, is that I think when people are kind of going through this like cycle of trying to change behaviors, you're obviously going to latch onto the ideas or notions that are like going to take the least effort to go with. If we use the example of like, saturated fat being something that we probably want to reduce to help with our heart health over the long term. Right? Saturated fat, people are probably having no issue getting in a decent amount of saturated fat within their diet. Look at MyFitnessPal or look at whatever nutrition tracking app. You might not be like having butter or like, red meat, but you might be getting a lot of saturated fat from a lot of other food sources that probably alongside the extra calories you're getting from all those things, probably not too good for you. But when you see this like information online, it like obfuscates the behavior change, right? Because you see the thing that comforts you and kind of says, okay, what I'm actually doing is actually right. All those people who are like eating healthy and eating salads and eating nuts,
Yeah.
they're the idiots.
Yeah.
And then obviously alongside that, the people who are saying all this stuff that I'm telling you, it's the word of the gospel. And it's actually really going to help? The supplements I sell. And it's like, oh, okay, so now I don't need to change anything. Buy your supplements. Like obviously they're all just like path of least resistance. You haven't changed anything, but now you're spending more money to buy supplements that you're probably not looking into, and they're probably doing fuck all for you, right? So I think that's also just a big red flag when it does come to assessing information online. If somebody is telling you that like something that goes completely counter to what like the common narrative is, I think some people are going to be just that like conspiratorial or I'd say anti-establishment outright, right? But if it goes completely counter to what the general advice is, and then that person also seems to be selling something that goes alongside their advice, probably something to just like think a little bit more critically with. So I guess like I want to just as we kind of like go through our last few questions here that I have for you, I guess like what would be some of the most common psychological kind of traps that people fall into when it does come to trying to change the behavior? And like we're talking about this, I guess, in the context of changing things for their health or changing things for improving body composition.
I mean, I guess like again, I probably don't want to speak too much on that just because I'm not a psychologist. So it's not really my kind of I guess area of expertise. But for me, one of the biggest ones is always that kind of psychology of failure versus success. So just I think the psychology of failing can be quite powerful, and that's why I feel so strongly about the all or nothing mindset, because I feel like if you constantly think that you're failing, the likelihood is that you are going to fail. And so having a few different ways of measuring success and not putting all your eggs in one basket when it comes to that, I think is super important. And I think kind of I've touched on a few things, like, the process. We've touched on a few things like having more process-based goals and all of that sort of stuff. So for me, I think feeling like you're succeeding is so important to ensure your continued success, if that makes sense, rather than constantly focusing on things that you're not doing. Obviously, there's balance to that. You don't want to be an enabler to your own, poor behaviors, but at the same time, having some encouragement for yourself often works well.
Yeah, I like the framework that John Berardi from Precision Nutrition like put forward in his courses, which is versus all or nothing. It's always something, because it always push you towards action. Because I think that's the thing that people get with this is like they feel, of course, if they're not like all in 100% with their goals, or if they're not doing 100% right, that's just not worth doing at all. So like, a context of that could be somebody's barrier is the weekends, and they are usually quite unstructured the weekends in regards to like they're always out and about. They find it very difficult to track their food and like be 100% like accurate the same way they would be Monday to Friday. So as a result, they just decide they're not going to track anything at all, or not even like bother, because it's too hard. Whereas like, okay, well, how about we incorporate something in here where we're saying, okay, like, can we at least try to gauge portion size? You might not be 100% correct, but your ability to gauge portion sizes will improve over time. At least you're kind of giving some type of effort. You're giving yourself some type of guardrails, because for some people without the guardrails, they're like, okay, well, I guess calories don't exist today, and then that doesn't help. That doesn't help like improve the cycle, because if that's always again, you could be good Monday to Friday, but if the same barrier is always the same barrier, and you're not doing anything to even try to improve it because of the all or nothing mindset, then that's something that does kind of keep you in this just this cycle of always being kind of frustrated and never being satisfied. So another one, I guess, alongside this, because I know you mentioned about the not being a psychologist. I don't mean psychological traps as in like give me your expertise in that specific area, but like just like mindset issues, I guess, right? So I guess like another common one here is in regards to people having moral attachments to their kind of like food or exercise regime, and like how I guess we kind of talked about like kind of we didn't quite talk about it, but we talked about like ultra processed foods, right? And some people can deem them to be like bad foods they shouldn't have. The aspartame, the fucking sucrose, things that they shouldn't have, or else they're being unhealthy. I guess so what would you think would be some useful strategies here to potentially help people kind of break down some of these mindsets around uh, these foods? Because again, very common for to hold people back from changing.
Yeah, so I think that for me, it's always about, or I would encourage people to look at their diet as a whole, not looking at specific foods. So, um, even if if you watched the Joe Wicks documentary recently that got a lot of controversy about, ultra processed food and how they were talking about it, and a lot of people felt that it was, unnecessary fear mongering. It's really interesting if you listen to the language that they actually use in that documentary, because I mean, I might be wrong, I might have missed some bits of it, but for the most part, what I saw was them saying the ultra processed diet, not ultra processed foods. So I think the point is that a diet that consists of ultra processed foods is unhealthy. That's true. But that doesn't mean that ultra processed foods themselves are unhealthy when consumed in moderation as part of a generally healthy diet, right? Of course, they're not optimal and they're not perfect, and they often hold minimal nutritional value, and they often have like downsides to them, as in they are often either high calorie or not particularly filling, or in some cases actually not particularly palatable. Um, but at the same time, what people aren't looking at enough is the totality of their diet rather than the specific foods. Oh, this is bad, this is good. Um, it's not that, it's the whole diet as an entire capture of what people are eating. And if somebody is eating an entirely, whole foods based diet and has a pizza on the weekend, that's very different to somebody that eats pizza all the time and has a vegetable on the weekend.
Yeah, I think like obviously with the good food, bad food situation, or like I watched that Joe Wicks documentary, and like I don't think I was as pissed off about it as like other fitness professionals seem to be. I think of course like did they maybe talk a little bit too harshly about like some of the negative effects of some of the sweeteners? Probably. They could have given a little bit more context in regards to
I
like,
mean, I think there was a lot of. I mean, look, these programs are made for
yeah,
entertainment,
of
right?
course, yeah, 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 yeah.
They're not all made for education. So, putting them in a lab and making it seem like Breaking Bad, like as though they're making meth when actually they're making a protein bar. There are connotations associated with that sort of stuff, which I think are negative. But at the same time, if you actually analysed what they said, rather than having that kind of emotional reaction to the concept of the fact that they're being critical of ultra processed food. I think a lot of people had made up their minds about that documentary before they watched it. I could talk about it all day, because I went back and forth with a lot of the things that I thought. I I don't necessarily think that the message was got across in the way that I think that they were hoping for it to get across, but that might also be because it was falling on ears that were already ready to you know to to to, to look at it negatively. I mean, I think people have got a lot of preconceptions already about Joe Wicks and his role in the nutrition world. And I think if you watch something in good faith versus watching it in less good faith, I think that the outcome will be slightly different. We all have our own biases, even when we don't think that we do. Um, and sometimes we're biased in the other direction. Like I actually, I think that Joe Wicks has done amazing things for fitness, and specifically But that doesn't mean I agree with everything that he says. But I also do think that as a nation, we do consume too much ultra processed foods. And so it's not unreasonable for somebody to highlight the fact that a lot of foods that are marketed specifically as being healthy might not be as helpful as people are thinking that they are going to be. And I think it's okay to talk about that as well, because I think that also I think within the fitness industry, a lot of people, like a lot of coaches, will encounter people who have a poor relationship with food from things like over restriction, over dieting, a really heavy focus on trying to be lean, etc. But I also think that the general population isn't all like that. In the general population, there are also a lot of people who are on completely the other end of the spectrum and who don't have any concept of how to eat a healthy diet or what is healthy, and that do consume mostly ultra processed foods and aren't scared of them in the way that the fitness industry is worried that people will be if they watch a Joe Wicks documentary, right? So, it's about kind of capturing the most number of people in trying to improve public health, isn't it? And sometimes we're in our little pockets of society where we are exposed to different problems, which means that the solutions will look different to all of us.
Yeah, and I think as well alongside that, a lot of other people are going to have different different risk tolerances, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
right? Like, so for some people, the negative effect that might come as a result of including some of these foods into their diet might not necessarily be as big a deal to them relative to maybe some of the benefits that it kind of serves them, just from a convenience standpoint, or just from an enjoyment standpoint. Like, as we talked about earlier, if it is a decision to switch for a Mars bar or something like that, like that, like, yeah, it's whatever decision, right? Like, however that kind of fits into your diet and promotes some adherence. And yeah, I think, again, you mentioned there with like ultra processed diet, and try to view it as you are having foods that make up the diet, but there's the diet pattern, which is ultimately the more important thing, right? And I think, again, when people are kind of going through their diet and they're kind of trying to audit like what's helpful, what's maybe unhelpful, I guess it comes down to what is pushing them closer to their goals and maybe what's pushing them further away, and like, again, what ultimately they feel may need change. Because like for some people, their bad foods could generally be foods that just trigger them to come into these overeating binge type patterns, and for that person, they need to have a little bit more of a deconstruction of what that food means to them, their ability to control themselves around the food, potentially take it away and maybe introduce it, like reintroduce it at a later stage once you've kind of worked on improving mindset, and then having them to be a bit more inclusive. Okay, I guess, like, trying to alongside the moralizing foods, you're also trying to get the person to move towards a more inclusive diet overall, where they are actually having foods that they are focusing on to make up the majority of their diet, and then those maybe things that they consider to be bad foods or unhelpful foods, they still should be in there because they are ultimately driving them towards maybe having a bit more enjoyment and adherence overall to the diet long term.
Yeah, because the benefits of food aren't always
Yeah.
entirely nutritional, right?
Yeah. It's like, as you're saying, with the likes of the Diet Coke. Nobody's drinking it thinking it's going to be the elixir for health.
Exactly.
Mike, I really appreciate your time today. I guess, like, a final question I have for you, right, is like, if somebody right now is struggling with change their behaviors, like, and trying to improve their health, and they have kind of failed a number of times before, what's something that you might tell them right now to help them get moving?
I think lower your expectations and lower your goals. I know that always sort of seems like a bit counterintuitive, but look at low hanging fruit and build on it. So, try and find the easiest things that you can do to improve your health right now. And for some people, that might look like having a walk around the block every day. For some people, it might look like having, 4 takeaways a week instead of 6. There's always something that you can do that is easy to improve things. And then once you've done that, and once that becomes second nature, then do the next thing. So sometimes I think, that we overestimate our ability to make change in one go. It will be easy for somebody who trains 5 times a week to go to the gym 5 times a week because they already go to the gym 5 times a week. But it won't be easy for someone who has never been to the gym before to suddenly train 5 times a week, because it's a lot to put into their life. So you have to place your expectations in the context of what you're already doing.
Awesome. Do you have anything that you could leave the listeners with, like where they can find you on Instagram? Have you got any events coming up?
All my socials are the same, which is Dr. Mike II. Do I have any events coming up? Other than like Christmas, I don't think so. I'm really terrible at doing that kind of, promo stuff, but I'm around. If there's anything going on, I'll always let people know on Instagram.
I'll link all that down in the caption. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me today, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Anybody did enjoy the podcast? I'm sure plenty of people enjoyed the podcast and are ready to change coming into 2026. Make sure to give me a rating and review on the podcast platform you're listening on. Go over to follow Mike. And that's pretty much that for this week. And we will catch you in the next one.